Now we're going to look at what economists call second-degree price discrimination. Now, in this case, what we're really talking about is pricing based upon the quantity that each customer consumes. And people who, shall we say, consume large quantities end up getting a relative discount compared to people who consume relatively small quantities. And to understand that better, some examples that we see in everyday life, take a careful look at your electricity bill. What you'll see is for your, there might be a hookup fee, but then there might be a base charge for so many kilowatt hours. But then as you consume more and more kilowatt hours, the extra price that you pay in many parts of the country actually fall. Now, whether that makes any sense for energy conservation on a hot day in August, I'm not going to go there, but that's how a number of bills are set up. Some water bills are set up the same way. You often run into second-degree price discrimination with quantity discounts, and these can be for business-to-business goods. Those show up quite a bit. I would say as consumers, we probably run into them most often in the food and beverage industry. Go into the grocery store and you see one price for Coca-Cola in a quart size or half-gallon size bottle. You see different prices if there's a 6-pack of Coke as opposed to a 12-pack of Coke as compared to a suitcase of Coke. And believe me, people spend lots of time in Atlanta thinking about what price should be charged with each quantity. Well, and let's take that trip to your local Starbucks. After all, now I'm going to bring up a diagram here. You've got, what do you want? Tall, grande, or venti. Even though the venti may be twice as big as the tall, it doesn't cost twice as much. It probably only costs $1, $1.50 more than the tall beverage. So what's going on here? Well, let's look at a diagram. I'm using one slightly different than in the textbook. I think in this case, having an upward sloping marginal cost curve makes sense, although it could be flat here and really wouldn't much matter. If Starbucks were a monopoly and they only sold one type of coffee at a single price, you would have the price be P0 and the quantity Q0. And so it would be above the competitive level, which would presumably be at the Greasy Spoon on the corner, would sell maybe its coffee at a competitive price, but it would be below the monopoly level. Well, through its pricing strategy, however, by having a relatively high price for the talls and then giving people a discount if they go to grande and venti, how does Starbucks end up ahead on this? Well, here's a way of looking at it. On a tall beverage, total revenue for Starbucks is going to be the area underneath the line P1, and what you see is Q1 customers will buy that, so that their total revenue is going to be a rectangle below the P1 line, below the demand curve, and above the horizontal axis. Now, let's then say, all right, some people will spend on that, but then Q2 minus Q1 people, that's the second block here, but think of the distance Q2 minus Q1, those are the sales of the grandes. And on a per ounce basis, they pay price P2. So think of price P2 times Q2 minus Q1 as an additional source of revenue for Starbucks. Then the venti customers, well, those are the Q3 minus Q2s. That last rectangle out here on the right, that's additional revenue. So think of it as there's really 3 blocks of revenue. There's 3 rectangles under the first block, there's 2 rectangles under the second block, and there's 1 rectangle under the third block. Add up all 6 of those rectangles, that gives you Starbucks total revenue. Now, is that less revenue than there is under perfect price discrimination? Yeah, of course. There's now some consumer surplus that's left, but you now have Starbucks selling, again, output levels are now at the overall competitive level here. They figured that out. So anyway, this is, I think, an interesting pricing scheme, and quantity discounts, you see a lot of them. And what you want to try to do is configure your product in such a way that the serving size or the lot size of the goods, say if you're selling ball bearings in a B2B setting, how big are the boxes or how big are the containers that they come in. That's another trick of the trade. And then try to come up with a pricing strategy that allows you to collect as many rectangles of revenue as you can. So anyway, didn't have a whole lot to say about second-degree price discrimination, but I wanted you to understand how it operates in practice. And you basically split the market into 3 segments. There's the first block, the second block, the third block. They each pay different prices, but that certainly ends up transferring some consumer surplus consumer surplus, obviously, from consumers to the monopolist. Okay, next up and last, in terms of pricing schemes, third-degree price discrimination.